Hello and welcome again to A2K, Allegiance to the King. Thank you so much for joining us for today's video. My name is Dustin Smith, and today we're going to be talking about Jesus' teaching on nonviolence, okay? There were a lot of messianic figures that were going around in the first century, and one of the things that made Jesus stand apart, other than being the actual Messiah, was that Jesus was a non-violent Messiah. And his non-violent example was taught within his teachings that are a part of the Christian faith. Let's look at some of the non-violent teachings of Jesus, okay? As people who are dedicated to allegiance to the King, we should be allegiant to the teachings that the non-violent Messiah taught, okay? So we can start here in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 5. Jesus said, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." That's Matthew 5:5. And I know some of the older translations say, "Blessed are the meek," but actually the Greek word is very clear. It means gentle. Blessed are those who are gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Those that are defined by a life of gentleness. They're not defined by a life of violence or abruptness. They are defined as the gentle people. These are the people that are under the self-control governed by God, okay? You can also see in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9 where Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God," okay? Matthew 5 and verse 9. Jesus defines there that the true children of God are defined by those who are peacemakers, okay? Not warmongers, but those who are peacemakers. Those who are defined by doing peace and also making peace, okay? The Greek word for peacemakers involves both the doing and the making of peace, okay? It's very interesting to see there how Jesus is defining those who follow him. And of course, Jesus was a peaceful Messiah, and Jesus was a gentle Messiah. He wasn't a violent warrior Messiah, as many of the Jews had supposed that the Messiah would look like. We can also see many of these teachings exhibited in the practical matters of the Sermon on the Mount. So let's look here in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 43, where Jesus teaches the practical matters of what it means to be a peacemaker and a peace doer. "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor, but hate your enemy.' But I say to you," the teachings of Messiah say to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why? So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Why? Because he sends the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." That's Matthew 5, verses 43 through 45. Jesus there says that some people teach that it's okay to love your neighbors, but you can hate your enemies, okay? But Jesus teaches that we are to love our enemies and even to pray on their behalf. Why? Because Jesus again says that membership in the family of God, being sons of God or sons of Father, involves the doing and enacting of peace, okay? So that you may be the sons of your Father who is in heaven. The true people of God are those who are defined by peacemaking, following the example of the peaceful Messiah. Okay? Now we can see how Jesus actually lived this out in a very practical way, because a lot of things that Jesus said and did in his ministry stirred up the frustration of many of his opponents, and oftentimes people wanted to kill Jesus. Look at how Jesus responded. Let's look here in Matthew chapter 12, and we'll look here in verse 14. It says, Matthew 12, verse 14, "But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him as to how they might destroy him." Okay? So they're going to go and try to destroy Jesus. How does the peaceful Messiah respond? Look in the next verse, verse 15. "But Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there." Okay? So a confrontational event is about to transpire. What does Jesus do? Does Jesus respond in kind? Does he respond in violence? No. Jesus feels that at this point, the peaceful thing to do is to run away, to avoid the violent confrontation, okay? And that's interesting to see as an example for Christians. Sometimes the best and most peaceful thing to do is to not respond in kind, to not respond with violence or with slurs, but to just remove yourself from the confrontation. That's what Jesus did, and that's an example for a lot of Christians, okay? Let's look here in Matthew 26, verses 51 through 52. And this is where Jesus is getting arrested. And we can see here where Jesus had the opportunity to respond in kind, to respond with violence, and to teach his disciples to do the very same thing, okay? But look at actually what Jesus teaches as the one who is defined by gentleness, as defined as a peacemaker and a peace doer. Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 51. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword." That's Matthew 26, verses 51 through 52. Jesus there does not approve of responding in confrontation with violence, with bloodshed, and with the attacking of the sword. He says, put the sword away, because those who have a lifestyle demonstrated by violence, those who live by the sword, will perish by the sword. Jesus rebukes the violent response when there's confrontation, even when it seemed to be the appropriate thing to do. We're defending the Messiah. The Messiah is wrongly being arrested. And Jesus says, no, we are defined by gentle, peacemaking attitudes. We are loving our enemies. We're going to pray on their behalf, and we're not going to respond with violence. Folks, these are some very difficult teachings that Jesus is giving us here, defining ourselves as gentle people who are doing and making peace, who are running away from confrontation, and certainly not responding in kind. But this is the example that Jesus taught. And if we claim to be people that are allegiant to the King Jesus, then we are going to be allegiant to his nonviolent teachings as well, okay? Hopefully this has helped you to understand the nonviolent teachings of the nonviolent Messiah. Thank you so much for viewing our video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more videos from A2K that encourage you to live in allegiance to the King Jesus, okay? My name is Dustin Smith. Until next time, you folks take care.